We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Ches Amud Aleph from Meseches Yoma. This is Yoma Daf 78a. The Gemara is discussing the vision of Yecheskel where a river comes out of the Kodesh Kodashim, and it said that when it reaches the entrance of the Heichel, the river is as large as the mouth of a small jug, and this is supported by this Mishnah in Midos, which says if you have water, mefachin asidim lios yotzin mitachas miftan abayis, in the future this water that's bubbling is going to be exiting at the threshold of the Beis Hamikdash. And Rashi says, what's the proof? Mefachin kimin hapach, meaning again it's like the mouth of this jug. Hein kishmagia lemiftan haheichel. When they reach the threshold or the entrance of the Beis Hamikdash, that's where it reaches this particular size. And the Gemara continues again discussing the size of this river. Mikan va'elach hayim eskaber v'yolat shemagia lepesach beis David. From this point on, the river gets stronger and stronger until it reaches the entrance of the house of David. This is where David HaMelech is buried. Kevan shemagia lepesach beis David. When it reaches this point, the house of the entrance of David, nasek and nachal shotef, it becomes like a flowing stream. Shebo rochatz in zavin v'zavos nidos v'yoldos. In this river, the zavin, the zavos, the nidos, and the yoldos, they can all bathe in order to purify themselves. Shenemar, like the pasuk says, Bayoma hu yem mekor niftach leveis David l'yoshvei Yerushalayim l'chatos ulanida. The pasuk is hinting to the fact that this is used for purification. Amar Rav Yosef, and Rav Yosef says, Mikan remez lenida shetzricha leishav at savara b'mayim. From here you have a hint that when it comes to a nida, she should bathe in water, which is deep enough that it will go up to her neck in water. But the Gemara says, Veles hilchas hakavase. This is not actually the halacha. The water does not need to be that deep. It just needs to be enough to immerse the entire body. And the Gemara continues, Shabbos, when it comes to Shabbos, the ika minol mai. If a person is wearing shoes, what is the halacha by crossing a river? In other words, we've been discussing crossing water on Yom Kippurim when you're not wearing shoes. What's the halacha on Shabbos when you are wearing shoes? Rashi over here says, Shabbos, the ika minol mai mishari lavor b'mayim. Are you allowed to cross the water? O dilma chayshin and dilma nafki mikari v'asilai suyinu. It's a different concern. We're afraid maybe the shoe is going to come off. You're going to end up carrying your shoe. What would be the halacha in that case? So the Gemara says, Amar Nechemya chasani devei Nasiya. Nechemya, who was the son-in-law in the house of the Nasi, he says as follows, Anoch hazise l'Rabbi Ami v'Rabasi. I saw Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, dematu urkama demaya v'avrua derech malbush. They crossed water. They were wearing shoes. They wore it in the normal fashion. So the Gemara says, Teinach minol. That makes sense when it comes to a shoe. A shoe can be worn in a tight fashion. It's not going to come off. But sandal ma'ikal memor. What are you going to say by a sandal? It's not going to be tight. Are you allowed to cross in that? So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Rechumi. Rav Rechumi says, Anoch hazise l'Ravina. I saw Ravina davar derech malbush. Again, he was wearing a sandal in the normal fashion, and he crossed water on Shabbos. Gemara says, Rav Ashi. Amar Rav Ashi says, sandal lechatchila lo. When it comes to a sandal, lechatchila, you shouldn't cross water with that on Shabbos. Reish Galusa ikla l'hagrunya levei Rav Nasan. So the Gemara says that the Reish Galusa went to Hagrunya, to the yeshiva of Rav Nasan, in order to give a shir. Rafram v'kulu rabbanon asa l'pirka. Rafram and all of the rabbis, they came to hear the shir. Ravina lo asa. Ravina did not come. So l'machar boy Rafram lafuke l'Ravina midaite the Reish Galusa. So the next day, Rafram wanted that the Reish Galusa would not be angry at Ravina. So he wanted to understand the reason why Ravina couldn't come to the shir. So Amar Le, so he said to him, my time lo asa mar l'pirka. What's the reason why the master did not come to the shir? Amar Le said to him, have a koiv li karoi. So he said, my leg was hurting. So he said, boy, lach l'meisa masani. You should have worn shoes. So he says, gaba de kara have it. No, it was the back of the leg. That wasn't going to help. So he says, boy, lach l'mir masandala. You should have worn sandals. That would help for that. Amar Le said to him, urka madamaya have it bu'urcha. He said, no, there was some water that was on the road. I would have had to cross water in sandals. So he said, boy, lach l'mevre derech malbush. So you should have worn them and just crossed. Don't carry them, just wear them. So Amar Le, so he said to him, Lo savar lamar, don't you hold, Lahad Amar Rav Ashi, to that which Rav Ashi says, Sandal lechatchila lo, that when it comes to a sandal, lechatchila, you're not supposed to cross the water even if you're wearing the sandal. And the Gemara continues, Tani Yehuda bar Grogros taught, Asr leishev agabe tina b'yom kippurim. It's asr to sit on clay on Yom Kippur. Amar Rav Yoshua ben Levi says, Uvetina mitfachas. We're talking about when the clay is wet, when it has that moisture, that's going to be a problem of bathing on Yom Kippurim. Amar Abai says, that specifically if it's wet enough that it can make other things wet. Amar Rav Yehuda says, Mutter l'hitstanin bepeiros. A person can cool off using fruits. That's not considered a problem of bathing on Yom Kippurim. And the Gemara continues along these lines. Rav Yehuda mitztanin bekra. Rav Yehuda would cool off using a squash. Rabba mitztanin biyanuka. Rabba would cool off using a young child, a baby that was cool. Rava mitztanin bekasa dechaspa. Rava would cool off using a silver cup. Amar Rav Papa says, Kasa dechaspa mole oser. If you have a silver cup that is full, that's going to be a problem. Chaser shari, but if it's not full, if it's missing some, so then it's okay. The pachra, but if it's ceramic, idi v'idi aser, it's always going to be aser whether it's full or not. Mishum the mishchal shachal, because that absorbs the moisture. So that's going to be like bathing on Yom Kippurim. Rav Papa Omar and the Meseches Yoma says it's Rav Ashi Omar. Rav Ashi says kasa dechas b'chaser nami aser. When it comes to a silver cup, even if it's not full, it's also a problem. Mishum the mizdarev. Rashi over here explains the mizdarev machlik, it is smooth. V'nishmat miyodo, it's going to slip from his hands. V'yishbechu amayim olav. So we're afraid that the water there is going to spill on him. That's going to be the problem of bathing on Yom Kippurim. And the Gemara continues, Zira bar Chamu ushbezichnin de Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi v'Rabbi Yosha ben Levi d'kulu Rabbanan. Zira bar Chamu was the host of Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi and Rabbi Yosha ben Levi and all the Rabbanan de Kesari have it. Of Caesarea, he used to host all of these Rabbanan. So Amar Leila Rav Yosef Berei de Rabbi Yosha ben Levi. So he said to Rav Yosef, who was the son of Rabbi Yosha ben Levi, he said, Bar Arya, son of a lion. He referred to Rabbi Yosha ben Levi as the lion. Ta'imulach milsam al yasadava ovid ovuch. I'm going to tell you a beautiful thing that your father used to do. Mitpachas hayalo be'erev Yom Kippurim. He had a mitpachas like a rag or a towel on erev Yom Kippur. V'shoro sabamayim. He would soak it in water. V'oso sakim in kalim neguvin. He would then wring it out. He would make it like it was almost dry. U'lamacher mekaneach ba panav yadav raglav. And the next day he would use it to wipe his face and his hands and his feet. Erev Tisha B'Av, when it was Erev Tisha B'Av, Shoro Sabamayim, he would soak it in water. U'lamacher, and the next day, Ma'avir al gabe inav, he would put it over across his eyes. V'chein ki yasser Rabba bar Mori Amar, and similarly, when Rabba bar Mori came, he said, Be'erev Tisha B'Av mevi'in lo mitpachas, and Erev Tisha B'Av, they used to bring him this rag, this handkerchief, V'shoro Sabamayim, he would soak it in water. U'meinicha tachas merashos, he would put it underneath his head. U'lamacher, and the next day, mekaneach panav yadav raglav, the next day again, this is on Tisha B'Av, he would wipe his face, and his hands and his feet. Be'erev Yom Kippurim, on Erev Yom Kippur, mevi'in lo mitfachas v'shoros abamayim. Again, they would bring him this mitpachas, they would soak it in water. V'yoso sukim in kalim neguv, and he'd wring it out as if it was almost dry. U'lamacham ma'avira al gabe einav, and the next day he would put it across his eyes. Now Rashi over here says, mitfachas sudr in kalim neguvim. Again, that's like this handkerchief. That's like a cloth, and he made it like it was dry. And Rashi continues, V'anisha mati, I heard a different explanation, Da'achi garsinan. Here's the proper text of the Gemara. Erev Yom HaKippurim mevi'in lo mitfachas u'mekaneach b'yadav. On Erev Yom Kippur, they would bring him this towel, and he would dry his hands with it, so he would get it a little wet in that fashion. He wouldn't soak it, but he would dry wet hands, which would make the towel wet. And the next day he would use it, put it over his eyes. It was a little moist from wiping his hands the day before. So that's a slightly different version of this story. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rabbi Yaakov le Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa. Rabbi Yaakov said to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa, Ipcha amrit lon, you told us the story in the opposite manner. And I asked you a question, isn't it an issue of schita, of squeezing it out? And Rashi over here explains, Ipcha amrit, you told it to us backwards, meaning B'Tisha B'Av oso son kamin kalim neguvim. You told us the story that it was on Tisha B'Av that he wrang it out before Tisha B'Av and made it like it was dry. Uverev Yom Kippurim lo amrit oso son kamin kalim neguvim. You didn't say that story by Yom Kippur. V'osivnach sechita. And I asked you, isn't it a problem now on Yom Kippur? You're squeezing out the water on Yom Kippur. Isn't that a problem of schita? Lashon sheshamati hachikamer. Then Rashi says, according to the version that I set up above, the second version of understanding the Gemara, what he said was as follows: Ipcha amrlon, you told us the reverse, meaning erev Tisha B'Av mekaneach b'yadav u'lamachor poshta. You told us that on Tisha B'Av is when he would wipe his hands, like on his wet hands on it, in order to make it wet. The erev Yom Kippurim shoro sabamayim, and you told us that on erev Yom Kippur he would soak it in water. V'yoso sa kamin kalim neguvin, and then you would wring it out in order to make it dry. V'osivnach, and I asked you schita to kamin kalim neguvin adayin yesh kedei lischot. Even in that case, if you're wringing out a fully wet towel, it's still going to be wet enough that it's a problem of schita. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Menashe bar Tachlifa, Amar Rav Amram, Amar Rabba bar Barchana. Rav Menashe bar Tachlifa said, in the name of Rav Amram, in the name of Rabba bar Barchana, Shalu es Rebbe Lozer, they asked Rebbe Lozer the following question. Zokin v'yoshe b'yeshiva, if you have an elder who sits and learns in yeshiva, tzarech litol reshus lahater b'choro so eno tzarech. Does he need to get permission from the nasi in order to permit bechoros? They had to look for a mum, for a blemish, in order for the bechor to be permitted. Do you need to get permission from the nasi to render that permitted or not? So the Gemara says, "My kami boilu." What exactly was the question? Why would you need to get reshus from the nasi? So hachi kami boilu. The question was as follows: Kihad Amar Rav Idi Barav, and it goes according to what Rav Idi Barav said. Davar zehi nichol lehem levei nasiya kedei lehisgader bo. They allowed this one thing should only be permitted by the nasi. That was a way of raising the authority of the nasi. So now the question is, tzarech litol reshus. Does he need to take permission again because this was something that was specific for the nasi to do? Odil makevan to zaken v'yoshe b'yeshiva ein tzarech. Or maybe you'll say, since he's an elder, he learns in yeshiva, he doesn't need to ask permission. So Amar Rabbi Tzadok ben Chalukah al Raglov, Rabbi Tzadok ben Chalukah stood up and he said, V'Yamar, he said, Ani ro'isi es Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra shazaken v'yoshe b'yeshiva haya. I saw Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra, he was an elder, he learned in yeshiva. V'Yamad b'ma'alim mizikeno shel zeh, and he stood in front of the elder, the grandfather of the current nasi, v'notal rishos lahater b'choros, and he did take permission in order to be mater b'choros. In other words, you do need to ask permission. And Rashi over here explains, Shalu es Rabbi Lazar, they asked Rabbi Lazar, Garsinan v'hu Rabbi Lazar ben Padas, this is a reference to Rabbi Lazar ben Padas, Zaken v'yoshi b'yeshiva, amrinam b'sanhedrin, shein chacham mater as ha'bechor b'yochid, liros es mumo el imkein notal rishos min hanasi. We say in Sanhedrin, a chacham can't be mater the bechor in terms of the mum, unless he gets rishos from the nasi, pamachas one time. V'hacham yiboilu, so they're asking as follows, Dim zaken yoshi b'yeshiva Sanhedrin hu, if it's an elder who sits with the Sanhedrin, mitzarach rishus solo, does he need rishus or not? The reason why we're even discussing this over here, what's the relevance? Because there's going to be another question that they had as well. They're going to ask, can you go out in a particular kind of sandal on Yom Kippur? So since that question is coming up in the same set of questions, so we have this one as well. Again, it was a way of giving authority to the Nasi. So again, the question was this Zaken, who's part of the Sanhedrin, so he said he was in front of the grandfather of this Nasi, in front of the grandfather of the Nasi, of the current Nasi, so he asked permission. So you see, you have to ask permission. And so the Gemara continues, Amar le Rabbi Abba, Rabbi Abba said back to him, you have the story wrong, that's not what happened. Here was the real story. Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra Kohen haya. Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra, he was a Kohen. And the question was as follows: Halacha Rabbi Meir, is the halacha like Rabbi Meir? Because Rabbi Meir says hachashud bedover, someone who's suspected in a particular matter, lo danu v'lo meido. He's not allowed to judge it and he's not allowed to testify about it. In other words, when it comes to Kohanim, Rashi says Kohanim chashudin al mumei habechor. Kohanim in general, they're suspect when it comes to blemishes of a Bechor. Lahatir asa asr, they're going to be more lenient than they should be. Ve'af lahatil b'mum, they'll even put a mum in there. L'fisha Bechor bezman hazeh, because nowadays a Bechor, where you don't have a Beis HaMikdash, ein lo takana, there's nothing you can do with it. Elim ken yesh bo mum, unless it has a mum, then you're allowed to partake of it. But otherwise, if it doesn't have a mum, it's going to be a problem. Ve'ala kohen litafel bo mishenasnu lo l'shomro v'lo. The kohen's got to actually feed it and protect it, etc., and he can get no benefit without a mum. The Rabbi Meir, the Rabbi Shimon, b'Meseches Bechoros. The Rashi says this machlok is now quoted in the Gemara between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon. That's in Meseches Bechoros. So that was really the question over here. The question was, if he's a Kohen, is the halacha like Rabbi Meir that it's a problem? Oh, Dilmor, maybe halacha like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Maybe the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Damar, who says Nemon hu al shel chaveiro, v'eno Nemon al shel atzmo. He's believed when it comes to his friend's item, but he's not believed on his own. Already on his own, we say the person has too much bias, but on his friend it is permitted. And the answer was halacha Rav Shimon Gamliel. The halacha is like Rav Shimon Gamliel. You can be lenient when it comes to somebody else's property. V'su kami bailu. And now the Gemara continues, as Rashi said, they had a further question as follows: Mahu lotzeis besandal shel. Are you allowed to go out in a sandal? And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Ches Amud Beis.